Kattegat is in danger from an old ally. My brother, Harald Sigurdsson, he believes he is the rightful king of Norway and has convinced the heathen witch, Freydís Eiríksdóttir, to support his quest. This chest and 2 more like it for the man or family who brings me their heads!
While searching for Olaf to avenge the death of Liv, Leif arrives at Olaf's encampment and learns from a dying soldier that Olaf was taken by Forkbeard. So, he moves on, still bent on getting revenge. Meanwhile, Harald, who's been hiding with Freydís after the war, tells her he can't continue hiding, as he needs to fight his half-brother Olaf for the throne of Norway. Pregnant with Harald's child and enjoying the peace of the moment, Freydís tries to talk him out of it, but he won't budge. In the meantime, Forkbeard brings Olaf to Kattegat to be executed. While at the riverside, the seer visits Freydís, shows her a marking, and ultimately convinces her to leave with Harald to Kattegat to fulfill her destiny as the keeper of the faith. At Kattegat, Leif, who intends to witness Olaf's execution, is met by Jorundur, a Jomsviking who knows him and his sister by name. Meanwhile, an imprisoned Olaf, when threatened with the death of his son, Marcus, accepts Forkbeard's deal to be the protector of Sven, Forkbeard's grandson. Afterward, Forkbeard declares Sven king of Norway, appoints Lady Alfgifu as regent, and leaves Kattegat. Empowered by his new position, Olaf places a bounty on his half-brother Harald and Freydís. In London, Earl Godwin, after warning Queen Emma that her life's in danger, saves her from an assassin who tried to poison her and captures the assassin. Meanwhile, in Kattegat, Leif overhears a man report to Olaf's men about seeing Harald and Freydís, so he follows them, and so does Jorundur. Leif intercepts Olaf's men, just as they're about to get to Harald and Freydís, killing them all. Afterward, Harald and Freydís, having heard the commotion, show up and learn of Sven's kingship, Olaf's new position, and the bounty on their head. As they move on, Olaf arrives a little behind them and notices their footprints, which he follows. Shortly after, Jorundur meets Leif, Harald, and Freydís, offering to help, and they agree after Freydís notices the seer's mark on his arm. When they arrive at the coast, they meet a lot of refugees who Jorundur is supposed to carry. Jorundur tells Leif, Harald, and Freydís to wait while he goes to bring the boat. In the meantime, Freydís tells her brother about her pregnancy and asks him not to tell Harald. Just then, Olaf and his men catch up with them. However, before Olaf can wreak damage, Jorundur shows up with his boat and they all hop on, leaving Olaf and his men on the shore. Halfway along, Freydís decides to follow Jorundur to Jomsborg, the home of the Jomsviking, while Harald and Leif head to Novgorod, where they intend to ask Harald's uncle, Yaroslav, the Prince of Novgorod, for help. When Freydís arrives in Jomsborg, she meets the rulers Lord Haraldr and Lady Gudrid, who is also Jorundur's mother. They welcome her warmly and ask that she accept her destiny by being the new priestess and to build a new Uppsala there in Jomsborg. In London, Godwin tortures the captured assassin, and though he gets only a name, Bear, he establishes that the man wasn't working alone. Meanwhile, Leif and Harald, upon arrival at Novgorod, encounter people taking opium, to which Harald explains that it's done to communicate with the dead. Eventually, they meet Yaroslav, who introduces Harald to Vidimir over dinner, but refuses to grant Harald's wish for an army, because the borders blocked by the Pechenegs has forced him to trade with Canute, Forkbeard's son, and as such, can't attack them. Spurred by his uncle's refusal, Harald opts to fight in a pit to raise funds for an army. Though he wins the fight, the gamblers elope with the prize money, leaving him right where he started. However, Vidimir had witnessed the fight and steps in, offering to give Harald the funds he needs if Harald helps him deliver something of great worth to the Byzantine emperor. Meanwhile, In Jomsborg, Freydís finally accepts her role as a priestess and declares Jomsborg the new Uppsala for the believers of the old ways. Back at Novgorod, Leif almost dies when he enters an opium-induced trance where he sees Liv, whose apparition has been with him since her death. After following her to the rooftop, she asks him to make the jump so he can join her in Valhalla, but he eventually refuses and collapses right there on the roof. Leif wakes up in Miriam's room. He'd met her during the dinner at Yaroslav's, and she'd brought him in her house when she found him at the rooftop to prevent him from dying. As they talk, he learns of her coughing condition and her plans to return to Constantinople. Later on, he thanks her for her help before leaving. Meanwhile, in Jomsborg, Hárekr announces Freydís' pregnancy before leaving for a raid, placing Jorundur in charge. In Novgorod, while in search of a boat, Harald meets a slaver named Gestur, who agrees to bring him onto his boat, since he believes Harald has Vikings in his employ, who can help protect the boat against the Pechenegs. However, unknown to Gestur, Harald has lied. So after the agreement is struck, Harald and Leif go in search of a crew for the journey, and end up recruiting Kaisen and Batu, gamblers from the fight pit, and a blind Pecheneg named Kurja, who will help guide them along the Dnieper River. In the meantime, Freydís is having a good time wowing the people of Jomsborg with her fighting skills. When she tries to teach a young girl named Refna to fight, Jorundur and Gudrid attempt to stop her, since there's a ritual everyone must compete before wielding a weapon. But Freydís has ignored it. Back at Novgorod, Miriam and Vidimir and his servant join the crew of Gestur's boat, and they set sail. Meanwhile, in Jomsborg, Hrefna ventures into the woods alone to fulfill the demands of the ritual. When Freydís learns about it, she gets furious and goes in search of her. Fortunately, she finds her alive, but she's injured and in hiding. As she leads her out of the woods, Hrefna shows Freydís the bone she procured, showing that she has successfully completed the ritual. Concurrently, in London, when Elfwin, Queen Emma's lady-in-waiting, and Godwin's lover sees the body of the assassin who's been killed and hung in public, she breaks down in tears. Queen Emma, having noticed the incident, inquires about it later, and learns that the assassin was her half-brother, and also that she's having a relationship with Godwin. Consequent on Elfwin's revelation, Queen Emma questions Godwin about his affair, and he tells her he'd kept it secret only until he could get Canut's blessing, which he just did. Furthermore, she lets him know about the assassin's identity and her plans to interrogate Elfwin to ascertain if he was culpable in her attempted murder. Meanwhile, in Kattegat, Olaf readies his army for a visit to Novgorod, after learning of his half-brother's visit. Delivering on her promise to Godwin, Queen Emma has Elfwin imprisoned and tortured for info on her half-brother and the bear. Though she expresses her innocence to the queen, Emma doesn't believe her. Elsewhere, Harald and his crew face a drawback when their boat gets stuck in a field of ice while being drawn across. Unfortunately, right after breaking the boat out, they realize the dam nearby has broken, unleashing a surge of water. They immediately release the horses and try to get into the boat, but Vidimir's servant, Elena, who they discover isn't his servant or a boy like they initially thought, but his daughter, falls into the water. Harald and Vidimir are able to save her, but Vidimir gets stuck and drowns. Back in London, Elfwin finally lets Queen Emma know of Godwin's desire to make his kin heir to the throne of England, then breathes her last. When Godwin learns of Elfwin's death, he tells the queen that he will never forgive her. The trail of tragedy carries into Jomsborg, when half of Lord Hárekr's fleet returns without Hárekr, and the other half, who had been lost during a storm. Influenced by this news, Freydís holds a ritual for Hárekr's safe return. Hárekr then does return, but he's furious when he sees refugees mixing up with his people, the Jomsviking. So, he orders his men to kill some refugees and arrest Jorundur and Freydís, who have allowed the crime to happen. When Freydís' pregnancy is due, she refuses help from Gudrid and goes into the temple to birth the child on her own. In the meantime, Harald and his crew encounter yet another setback from a damaged rudder. Harald and Leif decide to go to Kattegat to find the metal part necessary for the rudder's repair. Meanwhile, the crew left behind comes across Bagi, a Varangian man who identifies Kurja as the brother of the Khan, the leader of the Pechenegs, and the man who's put out a bounty on Kurja's head. However, the crew turns Bagi away and prepares for his return. Concurrently, Harald and Leif are forced to craft the part they need themselves, after discovering Kattegat has recently been raided. While at it, Leif tells Harald of Freydís' pregnancy, and Harald is furious. Back in the boat, Gester tries to leave with his slaves in fear of Bagi's return, but the crew knocks him out and locks him up. Meanwhile, Freydís successfully gives birth to a son, who she names after Harald, but Hárekr takes the child away, announcing him as Jomsborg's future, and lies to the people that Freydís is sick. After Gudrid pressures Jorundur to apologize to Hárekr, Jorundur learns that the prize for Hárekr's trust is Freydís' death. Back at the boat, Bagi returns with reinforcements, and the crew cleverly tries to stall for time. However, a fight breaks out when Bagi figures out the ruse, but before any extreme damage could be done, Harald and Leif show up and they kill Bagi and his men, while the slave girls kill Gester. In the meantime, Queen Emma is plagued by the possibility that she might have killed an innocent Elfwin. However, her mind gets preoccupied when Agnar, one of the high-ranking Vikings, tells her that he has found out that an alehouse owner named Cooper had witnessed Godwin paying coin to a man called John Barr, also known as the Bear. In Jomsborg, Freydís gets a flicker of hope when Jorundur tries to help her escape with her baby. However, that flicker is snuffed out when Hárekr catches them and she's forced to flee, leaving her son behind. When Hrefna then finds Freydís, she helps her fake her death, which Hárekr believes and uses to accuse and prosecute Jorundur. Without evidence to counter Hárekr's claim, Jorundur's right hand is cut off, and he's exiled per the Elder's judgment. Meanwhile, Harald's journey is stalled by a mighty and dreadful waterfall. After holding off the crossing by a week, Harald tries to impress upon the crew the need to move on, but they decline, frightened by the prospect of dying in the waterfall. Conversely, in London, Agnar and the Queen, still on their investigation, visit the alehouse and quizzes a woman who tell them of Godwin's past and about the bear, who turns out to be Godwin's guardian, John Fletcher. However, when both of them go looking for Fletcher, they find him dead. Regardless, Emma spots a ring on his neck and takes it. Meanwhile, Olaf meets up with Yaroslav in Novgorod and inquires if Freydís was with Harald. After Yaroslav replies in the negative, they talk further about the blocked trading routes, and Olaf promises to stop the Jomsvikings' raids on Yaroslav's trade ships. In the meantime, Hrefna's mom nurses a sick Freydís back to health and informs her that her failure to treat herself after birth has led to her womb's destruction and any hopes of other children. Back at the boat, Harald is finally able to convince the crew to go down the waterfall. Meanwhile, Canute returns to England and Emma relates her suspicions about Godwin to him, but he doesn't believe her. Going further, he betroths his niece Gyda to Godwin to compensate him for Elfwin's death. Concurrently, Freydís returns to Jomsborg and is shocked to hear that people think she is dead. In her anger, she challenges Hárekr, but he defeats her. When he is then about to kill Freydís, the Jomsvikings rise up against him and stone him to death, after which Freydís and her son are happily reunited. In the aftermath of the waterfall crossing, the crew is strewn apart by the impact. While Miriam and Harald are the first to return to the boat, they run into a group of Pechenegs, and Harald has to give himself away to protect Miriam. Meanwhile, Olaf's still searching for a way to Jomsborg, a bit frustrated that it's not on any map. In Pecheneg country, the rest of the crew makes it back to the boat, and Leif takes half of them to go rescue Harald, who's currently being tortured by Tirak, a local Pecheneg boss. When Leif finds the Pecheneg camp, he takes Kurja to Tirak and tries to trade him for Harald and 2 horses, but Tirak captures them both and sends word of Kurja's capture to the Khan. However, Harald and Leif are saved by Elena, and Britak and Dorn, the ex-slaves to Gister. A fight breaks out in the camp, and Leif kills Tirak, but they're forced to leave when the Khan arrives with his men. Rather than join the others, Kurja walks up to his brother and kills him using the poison Marion gave him before they left to rescue Harald. As a repercussion for his action, the Khan's men attempt to rip him apart, but Leif fires an arrow to his chest before that can happen. Meanwhile, in Jomsborg, with Harald dead, Freydís finally brings the refugees and the Vikings into the temple to worship together in peace. In the resulting happiness, Gudrid regrets having allowed her son's exile. Shortly after, Olaf finds the exiled Jorundur drifting in a boat at sea while searching for a route to Jomsborg. After feeding Jorundur and restoring him to health, Olaf quizzes him about Harald and Freydís, and he tells him that Harald has killed her and taken her child. Afterward, Olaf convinces Jorundur to take him to Jomsborg, and he agrees. On getting there, Olaf, on Jorundur's advice, raises the flag of peace, and Freydís lets them in. Inside, Jorundur and Olaf are surprised to learn Freydís is in charge, and that Harald is dead. Afterward, Olaf asks her to give up her son so he can be raised as a Christian, since Harald is one. But Freydís firmly refuses. Before Olaf and Jorundur return to their ship, Gudrid covertly gives her son a letter containing a plan to kill Olaf and his men. On returning to his ship, Jorundur tries to tell Olaf to fetch reinforcements from Kattegat, but he refuses, insisting on storming Jomsborg right away. In that regard, Jorundur suggests he take down the Sentinel first. Back in London, it is Godwin and Gyda's wedding. Emma gifts Gyda something special, and Canute welcomes them. Afterward, Godwin and Gyda get married, making their future children heirs to the throne just as Godwin had planned. That night, as Godwin and Gyda are about to consummate their marriage, Gyda shows him her naked body and her tattoos to remind him she is a Viking, and he spots a piece of jewelry on her neck, which she explains was a gift from Queen Emma. The jewelry had belonged to the bear, the man who raised Godwin, and Godwin senses this is Emma's way of tormenting him for the things she believes he has done. Meanwhile, Miriam's condition forces the crew to stop while in the river, and she lays there talking to the group as her illness worsens. When she is alone with Leif, she gives him the key to her small home in Constantinople, before dying in his arms. They hold a funeral for her the next morning. Sometime later, Harald and Elena talk about coming events, and they kiss, given that their journey has had them grow feelings for each other. As Olaf's forces reach the Sentinel, Jorundur betrays Olaf's men, but gets injured in the process. He tells one of the Vikings to tell his mother that he is not a traitor, before dying. Meanwhile, Freydís leads Olaf's forces into a trap as they enter Jomsborg, calling on Sven to join her on the dock before burning Olaf's men alive with a chemical she put in the water. Then, she and an enraged Olaf engage in a fight, and she kills him by impaling him with a spear, leaving Sven as the sole survivor of Olaf's group. She then decides to bring him to Kattegat, to facilitate an exchange for peace with Aufgefu. When Emperor Romanos of the Byzantine Empire travels to meet the crew, it's revealed that Elena is his betrothed, and was, in fact, the treasure that Vidimir sought to bring all along. The Emperor thanks the crew and tells Harald that he is in his debt. Afterwards, the group continues their journey and finally arrives in Constantinople.
You are Freydís, aren't you? The keeper of the faith.
Yes, I am.